Hi, AJ Hartley here, novelist, Shakespeare professor, fan of good TV, and today I'm going to be talking about Reacher, particularly focused on the second season. Before we get into the review itself, I'm talking about mysteries and thrillers because I write mysteries and thrillers, among other things. So if you haven't already checked out my stuff, please do so. There's a link in the description that will take you to my website, and you'll find all the books there by AJ Hartley and Andrew Hart, which is my other writing name, and I hope you find something there that you like.
You've been carjacked, right? Don't turn around. This won't take long.
Wait! Who are you?
Someone who prefers not getting involved.
You refer to these special investigators as your team, your soldiers, even your friends.
You do not mess with the special investigators!
And now they're all in trouble.
They were tortured. They dumped him from a helicopter.
And they're coming after us.
Good.
Damn, Reacher. When we were kids, we just wrote our names in it.
Why'd you gotta hit him so hard?
I don't hit soft.
What are our directors?
We prepare. We investigate. We put bad guys in jail.
What does he think he's gonna do?
Just like the good old days.
Yeah, you on the sidelines while I do all the work. He's a boss, and bosses give orders.
But they took a run at us in broad daylight. They're getting desperate.
Guys got good instincts.
Guys got good everything.
Surveillance photos don't do you justice.
Looks like you had a rough night.
Had worse.
Need a new jacket.
What's wrong with the one you just bought?
It has blood on it.
So let's talk about Reacher, Season 2, which just concluded. The first season aired in 2022 on Amazon Prime, starring Alan Ritchson. The second season has just finished. And if you're not familiar, Reacher is based on the character of that name in the books by Lee Child. And the series sort of skips around. The first season was based on Killing Floor, which was Lee Child's debut novel. The second season is based on Bad Luck and Trouble, which didn't come out till 2007. The Killing Floor was 97, I think. So there's a 10-year gap between those two books. And the third season, which has already been confirmed and will be based on the 2003 novel The Persuader. Now, I've met Lee Child a number of times, mostly at Thriller Fest. He's a British writer from the Midlands, Birmingham area, who has lived in the US for a long time. He was a TV writer initially, I think. he worked on Cracker. I remember talking to him about that. And then he became one of the most successful thriller writers in the English language at the moment. And Reacher, the character, works, it's a bit like James Bond, right? That sequencing of the TV show tells you something, right? It suggests that we're not, generally speaking, dealing with a character on a gradual arc, right? We're dealing with self-contained stories, and at the end of each book, Reacher is pretty much the same as he was at the beginning, so that you can read the stories in any order, which is part of the appeal of this kind of narrative. And Reacher is this huge guy, like he's 6'5" or something, and super well built, and he's ex-military police, and he used to run a sort of crack kind of detection and action squad for the military police. He's subsequently, he's no longer part of the military, and he drifts around. And part of what makes the character distinctive is that he is sort of famously without property, without means. He goes from town to town on buses, just sort of arriving and going to places that he thinks might be interesting for whatever reason, carrying little more than a toothbrush. So, all of this is in the TV show as well as in the books. And of course, wherever he goes, there's trouble of one kind or another. Partly because Reacher himself attracts it. He's the kind of big guy who draws a lot of hostile attention, but also because he has a tendency to stumble in on things that are not good and then feel compelled to somehow fix them. And in this sense, he's a kind of... I compared him to somebody like James Bond or Jack Ryan or those kind of things, but in many ways he's closer to that old Western gunslinger in the good, the bad, and the ugly kind of tradition who blows into town and gets into trouble or discovers trouble and has to take care of it. I think one of the things that makes the Jack Reacher stories compelling in the present is that, unlike some of those characters, there's a clearer sense of moral purpose in Reacher. That he has a very distinct compass that is indicative of what is right and what is wrong. He's ruthless, and he's brutal, and he has no trouble throwing his weight around, his considerable weight, but he does so with a kind of purpose. He has a hard line, and if you're on the wrong side of the line, you're in trouble. So I think, the character is both simple but also persuasive. And I think, one of the reasons I liked some of those books was that sense that he's not simply a brute. He's not conventionally sensitive or thoughtful exactly. But there's a character there, even if it's not sort of articulated through speech. There's a sense of an actual person there who has a particular code, and that's what the stories are about. Obviously, because of Reacher's size and his military background, a lot of what he does in these stories relies on physical violence, on him going and kicking the crap out of people or drawing people to him and then having to fight his way out of various sorts of tight corners. But he's not an idiot. He's also a thinker and a detective type figure as well. And I think one of the reasons that the TV show has been generally very well received is that the actor who plays Reacher, Alan Ritchson, is a huge guy and absolutely, stacked. And it's not always entirely clear how he manages to do that, because in the show we never see him do any exercise other than fight people, nor do we see him eat anything other than trash. And there's a moment in the first season when one of the characters says, "How do you eat like that and look like that?" Yeah, that's a good question. And I suspect that the actor himself is spending a whole lot of time eating much better and exercising constantly in order to look this way. But the fact that he is this big guy makes all of this stuff plausible, along with his military backstory, right? Whereas when there were movies made starring Tom Cruise, who's a little guy, they were generally considered not very successful. And part of the reason that they weren't very successful was that Cruise himself was not really plausible as this sort of figure. In the Reacher TV show, this guy is absolutely convincing as somebody who's incredibly tough. Now, is season 2 as good as season 1? I would say not quite. It's still compelling. It's still exciting. But there are a couple of issues with it that I thought made it a little less successful. I really liked season 1. It takes a little while to get accustomed to the level of violence if you're not comfortable with stuff like that. And that violence is done plausibly. It's carefully choreographed, but it's also pretty brutal, you know. And especially at the beginning of season 1, it seems like the show has to go out of its way to say, this is what this guy can do. And to show you that. And then it can back off that and keep that violence as a threat rather than something that is constantly on screen all the time. And I think that's one of the weaknesses of season 2, that it relies a little bit too much on the physical combat, the shooting, and the hand-to-hand stuff. And part of the reason for this, I think, is that in season 1 was essentially a mystery. Reacher arrives in town and his brother has been killed. And he hasn't been in touch with his brother for a long time. And so it becomes a personal mission to figure out what was going on, what happened to his brother and why, and who was responsible. And that who is key, right? Because it means that the story is at least as much a mystery as it is a thriller. It's a whodunit, literally a whodunit. Season 2 is not. Season 2 is straight out thriller. We know who the bad guys are all the way through. So the focus on the show becomes about the adrenaline rush of how is Reacher and his friends, how are they going to survive? How are they going to bring these people to justice, right? But it's not a question of who the villains are. We have to watch Reacher figure this stuff out, but as an audience, we know. And that means that there's a little less of the kind of intellectual playfulness and investigation that you get in a mystery, and more a series of crisis scenes in which you have to fight your way out. The other thing is that while the first season was really good at building a sense of Reacher's backstory with his brother through flashbacks to when they were children, living on various military bases all over the world, the second season is premised on the idea that some of Reacher's team from when they were in the army together have been killed. And he has to now figure out what's going on and also determine if one of the members of his team from the past has kind of gone over to the dark side, as it were. That he isn't a victim necessarily, but maybe in league with the villains. That's the closest thing we get to a mystery in the course of it. The problem is that we don't know these people. So the show has to give us little glimpses of them in order to then explain to us Reacher's emotional investment in the situation. And it does explain Reacher's emotional investment, but we don't have enough time to get to know those characters to feel outraged about their deaths. The other thing, there are secondary characters, of course, in season 2. I don't know that any of them are as good as Malcolm Goodwin, who played Oscar Finley, who was one of the cops, a black Boston cop living in Georgia where he clearly does not belong. And the quirks of his character and the things that made him both a great ally and a pain in the ass to deal with, as well as a sort of an interestingly unconventional character, were part of what made season 1 great. Also, Reacher got involved with, I guess she was a deputy of some sort in the sheriff's office. And that felt to me, sort of genuine, again, because we watched them get together. We watched their experience and going through various crises gradually pull them into a kind of relationship. Now, in season 2, Reacher also has a relationship with a woman, but she was part of his old team. So we don't see them getting together and experiencing various things, because the assumption is they were always kind of on the verge of getting together but haven't done until this moment. So again, it makes sense intellectually, but we don't feel it. We don't feel the pull that brings these two characters together. There's history, but we don't feel that history. And there's no equivalent to the Malcolm Goodwin character. There's a cop character called Russo who I like, but he just doesn't get enough screen time for his involvement in the story to develop a real connection with the character and an investment in him. So, what happens is that the story hinges on this sort of illegal trafficking of software connected to missile systems. And Reacher and the surviving members of his team have to figure out what's going on and bring them to justice. Now, so as I said, there's a lot of combat and a lot of sort of big thriller set piece scenes. The problem, and I've said this before with regard to other shows, the problem is that Reacher has become almost a superhero. And when we don't spend a lot of time getting to know him as a person, we merely see him as this sort of Rambo-esque, hyper-strong, incredibly skilled fighter. And there's a point at which you start to think this guy is indestructible, right? That he and his team can take on the world. It doesn't matter how outnumbered they are. It doesn't matter how long the odds seem to be against them. They're always going to come through. And so there's a point I felt in season 2 where the stakes kind of went down because I stopped believing that they were ever going to really face somebody or a situation who could best them. That said, I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun and entertaining, and there's good stuff along the way. It's well filmed. It's well acted across the board. And I think it's definitely worth seeing. I hope that season 3 goes a little bit closer to season 1, but that'll be a year in the making. In the meantime, I think it's definitely worth checking out. So yeah, yay Reacher. That's it. As ever, please like, comment, subscribe. If there are shows you would particularly like me to talk about, let me know in the comments and we will take it from there. Thank you to my patrons. Please check out my books and I will talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.